Good morning. Welcome to the Powerful Moment Sunday School class this morning. We're glad you're here. Hope your Labor Day weekend has started well this morning. What'd I say? Oh, we labor. I thought I might have said some wrong weekend. Yeah, Labor Day weekend. So glad you're here. There are handouts that are coming around. One is the same as last week, so you may already have that one. I don't know if you've got if I can't remember if I don't think we handed out the second one last week, so it's available also. Jamie has those. Thanks to Jamie for being our distributor each week, so we appreciate that. So we got guests with us this morning. Novella's son and his wife are with us, so we're glad to have them. So welcome back. They've been here before. So Donna Renee is back with us this morning. If you didn't get to meet her last week, say hello to her this morning. So there she. So we're glad to have her back. So I think everybody else is old. Well, I better not say old timers are already members or whatever. So Nona had a birthday yesterday. Congratulations. Happy birthday. 83. Wow, congratulations. Did you blow out all the candles? You didn't see any candles. Uh-oh. Well, he could have shared. He was having a piece of cake in your honor. He should have shared, right? So, good. Well, happy birthday. That's fantastic. So, all right. Let's see. Next Sunday, out on the welcome stand, there's a copy of what's called a church operations manual. Most of this is old news for the most part. There is a little bit of new news in there, and mostly the new news is the job description for a family pastor. So we'll be approving this document next week, although again we've approved parts of it before, but not as a whole. But the big news is it's already been announced, but there will be a family pastor search committee approved next Sunday, hopefully approved next Sunday. Our own Jamie Bradshaw is a member of that will be a member of that search committee. So once they're approved, they'll begin work to seek out hopefully a family pastor who will be responsible primarily for youth and children for the church. So big step next Sunday. So yes, ma'am. Oh, up to the 12th grade, yeah. So youth, children and youth up to the 12th grade, and their families, and their parents as such. So that's the primary responsibility. But there is a job description there in the handout, I think, or on the handout out there on the welcome desk on page 7, I think. Yes, Becky. Depends on you're more than welcome to ask a question. So, explanation. Is there something good morning? I'm Tom. Good seeing you this morning, Kenny. Welcome. So there's a handout she's bringing to you here shortly. Is there a question we can help with today, maybe? No? Okay. So, yes. So please, Becky brings up a good point. Please look through this, and if there's a question in there about anything or the family pastor, then yes, please bring your questions next Sunday. And that's right after church next Sunday when this is. Some of you, again, I start to say old Baptists, but some of you experienced Baptists may know this as a business meeting, but it's called a family meeting, okay? Change the terms. We rarely ever have one, so. Okay, anything else this morning, the announcement? I didn't see the announcement sheets this morning. Anything in there that else we need to know about this morning? Oh, it's a new format, huh? Wow. Okay, yeah. So, okay. All right. We good? Everybody good? Oh, wow. Men's group tonight, Gideon and Samson are the studies tonight. Uh, Mark is telling us right here at 6 o'clock, right? 6 o'clock, and the book is called 12 Unsung Heroes. Yeah, so that's, and Gideon and Samson are the two men tonight. Good. So that I know that'll be a good study. Yeah. And we appreciate Mark for leading that. So thank you, Mark. Mark's kind of our men's group. Well, not kind of. He is our men's group coordinator. So thank you, Mark. All right. Anything else? We good? Ready to go? So, all right. Who'd like to open us in prayer then? All right, Mark. Thank you. Amen. Thank you, Mark. All right, so we started last week the study in Mark chapter 14, verses 12 through 26. The goal today is to get through those verses, hopefully. We'll see. So, but that's the goal for today. As we get on into Mark, through these last three chapters, 14, 15, 16, there are going to be some long lessons, so there'll be some carryover from week to week in these lessons in terms of, again, we're going fairly in depth. So instead of just brushing over stuff, we try to get into fairly deeply into it. So with that, Martha, if you would read Mark chapter 14, verses 12 through 16. We'll do a minute of review, and then we'll get into, on your handout, it's kind of the top of the back of the first page is where we'll actually be starting today. Okay, so Martha.
On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where's my guest room, for where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover.
All right, so if you remember from last week, the disciples asked Jesus, it's Passover week. They're about to celebrate the Passover supper, and they ask him, where should we go to prepare the Passover for us to eat tonight? And he says, well, go in the city, and you'll see this man carrying a jar, and follow him, and you'll meet him and follow him to his home, and that's where we're going to have Passover. So, again, we talked about that response, but Jesus seemed to be kind of strange or cryptic or secretive, whatever, because, you'd think, well, a man carrying a jar, that wouldn't be, that unusual. But in that day and time, it was unusual because the women carried the jars. So for a man to be carrying the jar, it was unusual. So they see this man, and we learn from the Apostle John and his gospel that these two disciples who he sent were Peter and John. So Peter and John find the guy. They follow him to his home, and they begin to prepare to celebrate the Passover. So with that, when these two disciples, question is, when they find him, what were the two disciples to say to the man? What does it say there? Yeah. Where's your guest room? Where may my disciples eat the Passover? He'll show you a large room, and that's where it's going to be. So, do you happen to know whose house is speculated that this might be, where they're going to eat this Passover meal? Anybody have an idea? Speculation is this was John Mark's mother's house. So that John Mark being the writer of this gospel, the Gospel of Mark. So with this, it's thought that possibly John Mark was an eyewitness to what went on at the Passover itself. So, and John Mark's, we'll ask this question, do you know what John Mark's mother's name was? Yep. No, it's a pretty well-known one, though, Mary. So if you say Mary for any woman just about in the New Testament, I mean, there's so many Marys, you're going to be pretty close with that. Her name was Mary. So they go to Mary, John Mark's house to celebrate his supper. We know that, again, this house becomes significant. Again, we learn from the book of Acts that when Peter was released from prison, this is where he went to Mark's mother's house, Mary's house, when he was released, and there's a whole story around that. So, again, this is, I think, interesting that John Mark, can be an eyewitness here to what went on at Passover itself. All right, so the next question, what were the two disciples then to do after identifying the man who was to lead them to Mary's house where the Passover was to be celebrated? What were they supposed to then do? Make preparations for us there, it says. So Peter and John were going to go down to Kroger and get their supplies for the Passover meal. Well, no, there was no Kroger. There was no Old Charlie's, special family dinner for them to go to. This was a fairly detailed, intricate meal of Passover. And we're going to get into the steps of Passover here shortly. So they had to also go get the lamb that was going to be sacrificed at the temple that day. So they had to get the lamb, they had to get the other ingredients as such to supply the Passover meal. So what did the disciples find when they went into the city? Found just as Jesus had told them, there's this man carrying this jar. So the disciples, we think they're probably in a suburb of Jerusalem, probably in Bethany is where kind of they hung out during Passover week. So they go to Jerusalem and they find things just as Jesus had told them. So this reminds you of another occasion when Jesus told his disciples to make preparation for him, and if so, when? Went in, very good, Roger. They went in to get the donkey. So the donkey colt, yeah. When they went in, they told them to go into Jerusalem and find a donkey colt for Jesus to ride in during the triumphal entry. That we talked about that being the greatest parade ever for him to ride into. Again, you would think that would be a very kind of common thing, find a donkey colt. So again, but Jesus had made preparations, it appears, for that to be there. So there's a principle. Mark 14:16 says, the disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus told them. So the principle is Jesus' plans are always perfect. Man's plans are not always perfect. Jesus' plans are always perfect. There's an old adage that says, man plans and God laughs. But Jesus plans and it's perfect. So they find, the disciples find things just as they told him to, just as he had told them they would. And then Mark 14:16 says they prepared the Passover. So again, in just a second, we're going to take a look at the steps in the Passover itself. So before we look at that, there's a conundrum here that needs to be reconciled. So the conundrum is this is Thursday of Passover week, and typically we think about that Passover, the Passover meal and so forth was on Friday. So how could this be, how could they be, or why would they be, more like, why would they be celebrating Passover dinner on Thursday rather than Friday? Well, he goes in the tomb that night, that's true. Well, yeah, Jesus wouldn't be there. That's very good, Kim. Jesus wouldn't be there. So, but they didn't know that at the time. That's very good. So they didn't know that at the time. So there is another reason for that, for this. Not necessarily. Now, Jamie said, does it have to do with how the Jews counted days, starting at their day started at sunup, ended at sundown, as such. No, John MacArthur, I think, has the best answer for this. The answer is Galileans celebrated the Passover meal on Thursday night. Judeans celebrated on Friday night. 11 of Jesus' disciples were Galileans, so it would have been normal, traditional for them to celebrate the Passover meal on Thursday. Who do you think was the only non-Galilean? Who? Judas. Judas was the only non-Galilean. So they celebrated following the kind of the Galilean tradition as such, kind of like we would do Thanksgiving on Thursday nights. The Galileans did Passover on Thursday, so they were celebrating on Thursday night. So let's take a moment. There's 15 steps in the Passover meal. You've got a handout there for it. And so in the current Passover, no longer is the lamb eaten. That tradition, well, they could eat lamb now, but the tradition of sacrificing a lamb ended with the destruction of the temple in AD 70. So there was no place to go sacrifice the lambs anymore when the temple was destroyed. So in some instances today, the lamb since that time is not part of the Passover meal necessarily. So with that, let's look at each of these 15 steps for just a second. And the first one, and my Hebrew isn't all that good, so I'm sure I'll be mispronouncing some of these Hebrew words here. But we'll give it my best shot. It says, the first one, step one, is Kadesh, which means, Jill, fill in the blank. Sandals. Sandwich. Two good guesses, but sanctify. There we go. It means sanctify. So it's thought that this sanctification was accompanied by drinking wine. Now, why would you drink wine for sanctification? Might be just a good excuse to drink, some wine. I don't know, but wine, at that point in time had a lot of purposes, medicinal purposes, and so forth, as terms of sanctification. So it's thought that maybe the first cup, glass, whatever, of wine was drinking with this sanctification step. Step two is erhatz, something like that. And this is what?
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. So this is probably somewhat ceremonial, but also God gave practical reasons for doing things. So not only would it have been ceremonial, but probably without that knowledge, it was practical because they were washing their hands for cleansing, for what's the right word, for just good health practices. All right. Karpas, maybe, is what we usually start your meal with. Appetizer. So they had an appetizer after that. So they wash your hands, have an appetizer, and then there is your hots. And that is break the what? Middle matzah. So yahatz is breaking of the matzah. Here's this fourth step. The Passover meal is also termed Seder, so it's the fourth step of the Seder meal, and it means, yahatz, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, means dividing. So the question is, they're breaking the middle there's 3 pieces of matzah here. They're breaking the middle three, and matzah is what? Bread. So there's 3 pieces of bread, and they're breaking the middle piece of bread here. So why the middle piece of bread? Why is it broken? They're going to do that later. Yeah. This could be the softest. That's a good practical reason, maybe. What? The hearts, it could represent the heart, the middle piece. The patriarchs. Who were the patriarchs? Yeah. Trying to trick me, aren't you, James? Isaac and Jacob. And what happened with Isaac? What was Abraham doing with Isaac? What? Go west. Yeah. Jesus, yeah. Yeah. Isaac was the potential sacrifice. So here we see the middle piece could be or is the symbolizing the binding of Isaac, and for him to test Abraham to see if he was willing to sacrifice his son. Now that's one reason for it, but it also has some other symbolic meaning about why would there be 3 pieces of bread and the middle one broken? What's that? The Trinity. Jesus in the middle of the 2 thieves on the cross. And he was not, his bones weren't broken, but spiritually Jesus was broken. So we mentioned last week, and if we had time we would do this. This whole Passover meal has a lot of symbolism in Jesus, if we had time to get into all that. But this is one of the particular instances where this really, the Jewish people didn't realize it at the time, and they don't realize it now either, really. But us as Christians and believers, we can look at this and say this Passover meal that was instituted really was representative or symbolic in a lot of ways of Jesus. So then we have the Maggid, and that is tell the story of Exodus, and the story obviously of deliverance of Israel from Egypt, and they also drank another cup of wine here. So another good reason to drink some more wine. So then we have Rock Tazak, something like that anyway, and that is wash your hands again. So they washed it again, and then they have Matzi, which is the blessing over the bread. So then they have the next one, the matzah. They have the bread. So then they have the maror, maybe, and it is what? Bitter herbs. This has got to be either kale or cilantro. What could be more bitter than kale or cilantro? So yuck. So anyway, they had some bitter herbs here. So that's, I don't know what it really was, but some kind of bitter herbs. I think really today they use parsley here is what they use, seriously. So, and then we had the Korah maybe, and it's the Hillel, somebody said this earlier. Sandals, now, who said this earlier? Sandwich, there we go. Karen said this earlier. Sandwich, this is the Hillel sandwich. So, yeah, you were just early before. So this is a mixture of this, the maror, whatever that is, the bitter herbs, the mahor, and it's a mixture of that and something called a terrasset. Maybe I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. No, I'm sorry. Let's try that again. It's the harasset. So it's the bitter herbs, and this harasset is a mixture of fruit and nuts, and they put this together, and they put this between the 2 pieces of matzah bread, and eat this as a sandwich. Okay? What's that? You can't imagine that? In what way, Kim? Yeah. Yeah, put some mayonnaise on it. Somebody said, yeah. Yeah, salted down good. Yeah, it's, yeah. So probably it doesn't sound very appetizing to us. But that was step 10. Now step 11 is the Shulchan Aruch, the festival or festive meal. And here they ate a hard-boiled egg, symbolizing the Korban Haggadah, if I'm saying that right. So it was a festival sacrifice that was offered in Jerusalem at the temple. So here they're recognizing that the egg is, for some reason, it is a symbolism of, what do you think? Any ideas? What does the egg symbolize? Wood to us, wholeness, wood to us. To them is a symbol in this first Passover of mourning. So why mourning? Why would it be? What would they be symbolizing in mourning? Again, what's this whole Passover meal? What are they remembering? Yeah, they're about to leave slavery in Egypt. And what happened on their way out? Yeah, the 10th plague, the first son. If you didn't have the blood sprinkled on your door, the firstborn son, the firstborn animal was killed. So it was a time, even though if they were leaving, they obviously had their door marked, but again, there was a lot of deaths, a lot of reason for mourning at that time. So this symbolized or represented mourning. Now the Zophon, and it's to eat the afikomen. So the Zophon means hidden. And I think Jamie was going to talk about this earlier. So what did they do, Jamie, when they talk about hiding it? What were they hiding? Why did they do this? Yeah. So they hid this piece of matzah bread away, wrapped it in linen. They hid it somewhere in the house. And today, it's celebrated. It's a kind of time of celebration. The children go try to find this piece of matzah bread that's hidden away, and the child who finds it gets a big prize. So again, as we think about, the symbolism here, what would this symbolize to us as believers, Christians? Hiding Easter eggs, yeah. No, that was way later. But Kim was asked, "Is that how eggs got into Easter?" But no, that's more about what we think about eggs. When we think about eggs, if you heard the example before, it's kind of 3 in 1: the shell, the white, and the yolk. So it's a representation of Jesus and so forth. But it's whole, and so. But thinking about that. This bread, this matzah being hidden away, who's going to be hidden away? Jesus is about. Yeah. Jesus is hidden away from the Jews, and also he's about to be put in the tomb, right? So he's going to be hidden away physically. So again, without them knowing it, a lot of this meal is very representative of Jesus. So then they have the Barak, maybe, and it is the grace after the meal. So it's interesting here that they have grace before and grace after the meal. That's a good tradition, probably. Something probably, we should practice, really. And then after that, step 14, oh, I forgot, in step 12, when they were eating the afikomen, more than likely that was, they got to drink some more wine then. So, yeah, so every step, is a good excuse for that. Oh, did I say that? No, where am I? I've lost my... Well, it was... Oh, eat that. Oh, yeah. No, I'm sorry. It's the larger part of the matzah bread. They're broken in half. Thank you, Stan. No, I forgot to say that. Excuse me. So it's the part that was hidden away, the afikomen. So.
Well, wine's supposed to be good for the stomach. Don't you remember that Paul said that?
Yeah.
So in order to get all this down, I guess you needed a little help.
Yeah. To eat those bitter herbs, they had to have some wine to wash it down. Yeah. So.
It's the first Pepto-Bismol.
First Pepto-Bismol. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's also thought between steps 9 and 12, somewhere in there. A lot of people think is at step 9 itself is where they ate the lamb at that point in time too. So all right. So then step 14 is the Hallel. It's the Psalms of praise, and those are Psalms 113 through 118. And then finally is the Nertza, which means, I can't remember if I put that in there or not. Is there a blank there? AC something. So what is that? Action. Good guess. But accepted. Very good, Kim. So the Seder concludes with a prayer, and they're praying that this night's service, this night's Passover meal would be accepted. So then there's a hope for the Messiah would come. The Messiah, of course, at this first communion, first Lord's Supper they're about to have, their hope is already realized. The Messiah is there. So they don't necessarily, they kind of realize it on one level, but most of the Jewish people did not realize it. The disciples kind of realized it on one level. So, Messianic. Oh. So Jan was saying her brother-in-law and his wife go to Leeville Methodist Church, and every year they have a Seder meal, a Passover meal, which would be, again, it would be a good time to do that and say, now this step represents this part of Jesus' life and so forth. It would be a very moving service. So, all right. So, again, let's take, we got a few minutes here. We're not going to finish this lesson today. Let's take a few minutes and watch a video about kind of a video about the Passover meal itself, that how it would have occurred in the steps and the times of Jesus, kind of to affirm what we've been talking about. So if you would play that for us, Johnny.
Each year, Christians throughout the world celebrate Holy Week, the most significant period in the Christian calendar. Holy Week commemorates the last week of the life of Jesus Christ, his crucifixion, and his resurrection from the tomb. During this same time each year, Jews around the world celebrate Passover, the most significant festival in the Jewish calendar. The Jewish holiday of Passover commemorates the redemption of the ancient Israelites from bondage in Egypt after being slaves for 300 years to Pharaoh. The Bible records the Lord's command to celebrate this first Passover. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, Speak ye unto all of the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb without blemish, a male of the first year, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood, and strike it on the doorposts of the houses, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. For 3,500 years, Jews have celebrated Passover, and have used the symbolism of the meal to remember the captivity and redemption of their fathers, and to look forward to the Messianic age and their own final redemption. Jesus, himself a Jew, likewise used the symbolism of the Passover meal to teach his disciples about his mission, as he prepared them to understand the spiritual redemption that would come from his suffering and death. Just as the blood of the Passover lamb on the doorposts of the homes of faithful Israelites had saved them from the power of the destroying angel, so the blood of the Lamb of God, shed for all on Calvary's cross, would save all who would come unto Christ from the power of sin and death. Though it is difficult to know exactly how the Last Supper took place, the Gospel writers refer to several Passover symbols during the meal and discourse that followed. Understanding this sacred holiday in its Jewish context will help us appreciate the Last Supper and the Savior's redemption on this Passover night. Tradition tells us that the day was Thursday, the first day of the Passover feast. As the evening approached, Jesus and his disciples gathered in a large upper room on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. His disciples had made preparations beforehand, and the table was set with all of the necessary elements for the Passover meal. According to Jewish tradition, a roasted lamb would be served as the main dish in remembrance of the blood of the lamb on the doorposts of the homes, which protected their ancestors from the destroying angel. Alongside it, bitter herbs representing the bitterness of slavery, and a mixture of chopped apples and nuts called haroset, representing the mortar used by slaves to build the wonders of Egypt. Salt water was used to recall the salty tears shed by the Israelites in slavery. Into the salt water they dipped greens, such as parsley, representing springtime, the season of Passover, the season of hope. Central to the Passover feast was the unleavened bread, or matzah, which reminded the disciples of the haste with which Israel left Egypt, their ancestors not having even enough time to allow their bread to rise. This was the bread which Christ blessed and broke and gave to his disciples, saying, Take, eat. This is my body which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. After the same manner also he took the cup, saying, This cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do in remembrance of me. In instituting this sacramental emblem, Jesus used one of the 4 cups of wine which was consumed during each Passover meal, each cup representing a unique aspect of God's promise to redeem Israel. During the meal, the question was asked by the youngest member, Why is this night different from all other nights? Whereupon the story of the redemption of Israel from captivity was told. Passover is different from all other nights. But this Passover night was truly different, for on this night Christ would redeem all his children from the slavery of sin and the bondage of death. After completing this symbolic meal, And when they had sung a hymn, Jesus and his disciples went out into the Mount of Olives into a garden called Gethsemane. Jesus' atoning journey had begun. The true Passover lamb had come.
So we're going to get in a lot of detail as we go through the rest of Mark about the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. So, Martha, if you would, read Mark 14, 17 through 21, please.
When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12, and while they were reclining at the table eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were saddened, and one by one they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me." "It is one of the 12, he replied, "one who dips bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born."
So in between Mark chapter 14, verse 17 and verse 18 is when Jesus, is recorded in the Gospel of John, washed the disciples' feet. And you saw that on the video. So on several prior occasions, Jesus had predicted his death. This wasn't the first time. So he also predicted he would be betrayed. He predicted that in Mark chapter 9, verse 31, and Mark chapter 10, verse 33. However, he had never revealed who the traitor would be until tonight. He gives them indication of who, or that night, he gives them indication of who the traitor would be. So why do you think Jesus had waited to this possible last moment to identify who the traitor would be? Jan says maybe they wouldn't treat him differently, meaning Judas differently. Maybe wouldn't treat Judas differently, possibly. Maybe if he identified him earlier, Jill says maybe Judas would have left him. Yeah, that's good. It's all in God's timing. Yeah, certainly. It's in his script, yeah. Script and timing meaning providence. And we're going to talk a lot about God's providence here in a later lesson, because all of this came about according to God's providence. All those are good answers. We're not told. One thing I thought of, maybe it was to give Judas all this time to maybe change his mind. Maybe it was, again, Jesus is full of grace and mercy, so Judas made his own decision to do this. Maybe Jesus was hoping he would change his mind and that something else would occur, some other person. So how did the disciples react to Jesus revealing the traitor was one of them? Surely you don't mean me. So they were incredulous. They couldn't believe that one of their own, it would be one of them. John's gospel said they stared at one another at a loss to know which one of them he meant. So, Martha, read John's gospel, chapter 13, verses 22 through 30, and it provides some further insight into this interaction between Jesus and his disciples.
The disciples began looking at one another at a loss to know which one he was speaking. There was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. So Simon Peter gestured to him and said to him, "Tell us who it is of whom he's speaking." He, leaning back thus on Jesus' bosom, said to him, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus then answered, "That is the one for whom I shall dip the morsel and give it to him." So when he had dipped the morsel, he took and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Therefore Jesus said to him, "What you do, do quickly." Now no one of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said that to him. For some were supposing, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus was saying to him, "Buy the things we have need of for the feast, or else that he should give something to the poor." So after receiving the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was night.
Okay. So at the Passover meal, tradition would have been that the host, Jesus, would be seated in kind of the center of this rectangular table. The next most important person would have been on his right. That sounds like John. And it sounds like, when I said seated, they're really kind of reclining here on pillows or whatever. And then the next person to the right is Peter, because he's going to lean over and say, John, I don't want to ask another stupid question, so you ask him who this is going to be. And then so on his left, we find out who's sitting there. Judas. That would be after the person on the right, the next most important person would be on his left. So Judas was kind of in a place of distinction, you might call it, a place of importance, and sitting at this or reclining at this table. So how did Jesus reveal who the traitor was? He said, give the morsel of bread, and whoever dips it in the dish, and that's going to be who it is. And that was Judas, and that's probably step 10 of those 15 steps that we just talked about. So upon seeing Jesus give the bread to Judas, how did the other disciples react? They were sad that it was one of them, but I'm sorry. Yeah, they thought Jesus was going out to, take the money to buy something, give to the poor, whatever. Mark, you said, what'd you say? They were betrayed. They felt, but did they really get it that Judas was the guy? No, they still didn't get it that Judas is the guy that's doing this. So this group of 12 disciples have been together every day virtually for 3 years, and they just can't believe that one of these folks, one of these 12 that have been together, shared all these experiences and so forth for 3 years, one of them would be the actual person who would betray Jesus. So they were probably, probably Jill says they were relieved when it wasn't one of them. So they asked the question, is it me? So they didn't know really. So there probably was some relief there that, I hope it's not me. So, but Judas seemed to be above suspicion at this point. Even when he left to go do what he was going to do, they still didn't get it. They still didn't recognize, hey, it must be Judas. Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Roger's asking, they had, or making comment, asking the question, did they vote for Judas to be the treasurer? Had a lot more than likely, had a lot of trust in him to be treasurer and so forth. I don't know that they voted for. We don't know. We don't know. That's a good question. But I could see Judas volunteering too. Yeah, that they say, hey, it's an opportunity to make a little on the side here. So we don't know. We're not told. But that's a good thought. Why was he treasurer? So a lot of questions here that when we get to heaven, we'll have to ask and find out. So that's one of them. Why was Judas the treasurer? So I'm sorry, Joe. Yeah. 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 I'll try to summarize what Jeff said, or some of the points. Jeff said a lot of times our strengths become our weaknesses. So Judas may have been good at counting money and keeping up and buying stuff, whatever. So, but that strength becomes a money because, as we're told, money can become an idol. And again, that's one thought. Maybe that's what happened with Judas. So Jeff also said there at the end that he said don't play poker with Jesus. I don't know if there'll be any poker going on in heaven or not, but he said, but Jesus he didn't say it this way, but he has a poker face, that all through Jesus' ministry there was no inclination that the person was Judas. Judas was treated just like the other 11 were, so it was no way to tell from Jesus that he was going to be the one, which kind of brings me back to the thought process that Jesus maybe really didn't want it to be Judas. He wanted Judas to change his mind, and God would have another plan, and it would happen with somebody else. So, but it didn't. Judas went ahead with the plan. I said with his plan.
And didn't it say that Satan entered his heart at that moment?
Yeah.
Too.
Satan entered his heart, but Satan had already been at work with him because he'd already communicated with the Jewish authorities about this plot as such. So, but that was the instant when that was no turning back point, maybe you might say.
Yeah, he still could have changed his mind.
Yeah, still could have changed his mind even on the way to sell out Jesus as such. But okay, so the point is we have free will to accept or not accept, to sin or not to sin. And again, Judas could, as Martha said, he could have changed his mind even on the way to the Jewish authorities. But a lot of times when we're on the way to sin, we're kind of like Judas. We don't change our minds, do we? We just keep right on going, barreling ahead. All right, so where was I? Jesus made two statements there in Mark chapter 14:21. One of the statements was about himself, and the other was about the man who was to betray the Son of Man. So what was the statement that Jesus made about himself, and then what was the statement that he made about the man who betrays the Son of Man? So what was the statement that Jesus made about himself? Son of Man will go just as it was written about him. Meaning, what does that mean? What's Jesus saying there? He's going to follow through. What's it mean, just as it's written? Yeah. Prophecies will be fulfilled, were fulfilled, and specifically, or a lot of prophecies here. Psalm chapter 22, Isaiah chapter 53, Zechariah chapter 12, all their prophecies and all those Old Testament verses that were being filled. Specifically, Psalm chapter 41, verse 9 says, even my close friend, whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. That's Psalm 41, verse 9. So here we see another specific prophecy being fulfilled about Jesus' life, and particularly about his crucifixion. So what was the statement made about Judas? Better that he had not been born than to do this. So again, there's a lot. Some places, sometimes I think, well, Judas, he might have really been a believer. But this statement kind of makes me think, probably not. If it's better for you not to be born, then what's that mean? What's Jesus saying there about Judas? Yeah, he's going to spend eternity in hell, basically. It's better he was never born. But that statement, I think, applies to all unbelievers. It's better, for an unbeliever who's heard the gospel message and refused, it's better they've never been born. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 31 says, it is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. So, as an unbeliever, it's going to be terrifying at Judgment Day. Kind of scary. All right, we got a few minutes left. Martha, if you would read Mark chapter 14, verses 22 through 26.
While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take it, this is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many, he said to them. Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
All right, so when during the Passover meal did Jesus institute the Lord's Supper or communion? We've got 15 steps there. When do you think it was? Got 1 in 15 chance here. Maybe 11, Alice says. Maybe so. What did you say? 12? So we're not specifically told, really. John MacArthur thinks it's step 9 when they were eating the lamb as such, that it might have been appropriate. They're eating the lamb, and here's the Lamb of God about to be sacrificed as such on the cross. But we really don't know. Probably somewhere between steps 8 and 12, somewhere in there that it could have been at that time. That's when wine was consumed, so it had been kind of natural to have communion then. So we're not really told, but somewhere in there. So possibly after step 10, yeah. So the Gospel of John, Kim says it's probably after step 10. The Gospel of John tells us that Judas had left before the Lord's Supper was taken. We know it was before he was taken, so we're not sure exactly which step, but it was after it was, he left before the Lord's Supper commenced. So why was it appropriate that Judas be gone before instituting the Lord's Supper? What's that? It's for believers, isn't it? And Pastor Will says, again, makes you think that Judas was not a believer. Pastor Will says something, I think, interesting each Lord's Supper. We're celebrating the Lord's Supper today, by the way. You get an old stale cardboard piece of wafer and some little stale grape juice today. But he says something very interesting. You know, you can take the Lord's Supper if you're not a believer. It just doesn't mean anything to you. It's just meaningless. So, but again, the Lord here specifically waited till Judas had left. So I think that's telling. So let's finish up. Finish up with this. We won't finish the lesson. The Lord's Supper has several names, including the Lord's table, communion, Holy Sacrament, Eucharist, and ordinance. So let's look at each one of those because they each have kind of a different meaning as such. So in different denominations use different terms for the Lord's Supper. So the first is the Lord's Supper or the Lord's table. So what do you think that means? Act of worship. Yeah. It implies, well, if it's the Lord's table, the Lord's Supper, who's the host? The Lord. So we're worshiping the Lord here. So it's His supper that we're celebrating, we're remembering. It's because of His command, do this in remembrance of me, right? All right, so communion or Holy Communion, what's that? What's that mean? Act of receiving. Can't use the word in the definition, Becky. Didn't you learn that in Come means together. Yeah, so take a step further, Karen. You're on the right trail. We are coming together, or we're united with Christ in His death and resurrection. When we take the Lord's Supper, we're commemorating, we're symbolizing that we are uniting with Him. We're coming together, as Karen said, with Him. So, communion is a rough translation of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 16. And sometimes this word communion is translated participation, sharing. Karen had a good definition, coming together. So Eucharist. We don't use, excuse me? We ain't got the sacrament yet. Oh, is it? I thought Eucharist was next. No? Okay, sacrament. Let's do sacrament then, since Jill wants to. We got to do it quick. Sacred, maybe? Ceremony, what? Ceremony of Divine Grace. Becky's done her homework. It's sacraments, the way I looked at it, is usually a very ordinary thing. This wine, this piece of cardboard bread they had, it was very ordinary. They did this every year since they'd left Egypt. So this was not unusual for them. So it's very ordinary. But what happens is these ordinary things, this stale wafer and this juice, takes on a totally different meaning. And it's like, we've got we got a keepsakes drawer at home. And we got a bunch of cards and pictures and whatever in there. And to you, they wouldn't mean diddly squat. But to us, they're very meaningful. We've kept them for years and years and years of people who have given these to me. Matter of fact, I just found this in my Bible. I kept this card. I don't know. There's not a date on it. But this is given to me years and years ago by, I'll tell you who it is, by Ken and Shirley Hayden. And I've kept it all these years. This kind of happenstance. It fell out of my Bible the other day. And I just thought, this is a keepsake and something we've kept. And it's kind of the same as this, as the sacrament or the holy sacrament, that these ordinary things have taken on meaning beyond themselves, that it's representative of Christ's blood and his body. So again, that's kind of what's behind when we call it sacrament or holy sacrament. That's kind of the thought behind it. So we got two more, but we'll hold on to those till next week. Eucharist and ordinance. So we're over time. Yes? Okay, plenty of money for the Bibles. Jill said leftover money's been put in the class account. Jill, thank goodness she didn't buy. It wasn't enough to buy a pair of shoes. So, and Bo and Debbie are providing the backpack. So we start picking those up next week. Thank y'all for being here. Y'all have a blessed week, and we'll continue next week and chat Mark.